Western mining now, company
Western mining make all trouble for everybody.
Ningil Reid lives on the outskirts of Port Augusta in South Australia. He belongs to the Kokatha people, the traditional owners of this area. They've opposed mining here since drilling began in the mid-80s.
That place where they're digging, that's the dreamtime story of the sleepy lizard, where they all went in to go to sleep, right? They're digging the inside out of the sleepy lizard, his stomach. And where they put that main shaft, through Aboriginal traditional cultural law, they drilled right on his head. And now a lot of people might get a lot of headaches.
In economic terms, South Australia is already suffering a migraine, with unemployment running at a record high. Many politicians here believe that the panacea lies in the home of the sleepy lizard, also home to one of the world's biggest uranium deposits. Successive South Australian governments have turned to Western Mining's huge investment at the Olympic Dam mine near the town of Roxby Downs as the hope for a future. There's even special legislation in place to ensure the company has all that it needs in the way of water, power and roads. Most of what's mined here is actually copper, but uranium makes up 1/4 of all production.
We provided the government about $12 million a year in royalties, in other payments including tax, all up to government it's about $30 million a year, so it is important economically.
The skips here haul 9 tonnes of ore, 400 metres to the surface every 60 to 70 seconds.
Out at the mine site, an epidemiologist visiting from the United States takes up some of Ningil's concerns with Western mining. The American and the Aborigine have never met, but without Ningil knowing it, the Kokatha cry is being heard around the world.
Is this a protected site here? Isn't this the sleeping lizard right here where this is going through? The heritage site?
There are ethnographic sites on the mine lease, yeah, but we have respected those and we haven't developed in areas where Aborigines have asked us not to. That's not easy given an operation like this, but we have respected their sites.
I didn't think they wanted to mine here at all.
Western Mining is now pumping $1.5 billion into doubling the mine's output. The federal government gave it in-principle agreement for that 14 years ago. With work on the expansion only just beginning, Western Mining is seeking yet another in-principle approval, this time for a massive quadrupling of its current output.
And that's the way that they keep the public out of the decision-making process, where we're up at Roxby Downs mine now complaining about the expansion, and they're saying the approval for that was given in the way they do the legal process back in the early 80s. If people come back to Roxby Downs in the year 2006, 2007, they may be faced with another doubling of production again. And when they say that this isn't appropriate, that this is not on, they'll be told, well, that approval was granted back in 1997 when we did the EIS, and you don't have a say anymore because those legal rights have been granted. And lawyers will say that Western Mining has a right to conduct those operations and that you'd have to compensate the company to stop them.
Conservationists have set up camp in this remote part of the South Australian desert. With them are local Aborigines and epidemiologist Dr. David Richardson. Anti-uranium protests here are not new.
And then each day we went and blockaded the mine shaft. It was just the mine shaft going down in '83.
How did you do that?
We just laid our bodies across the fence there.
Many of the organisers have been coming to Roxby Downs since the mine opened 13 years ago.
Today's blockade has not only brought the Roxby protest back into the news, but it's also intensified the anger of the men and women who work at the uranium plant.
Then can we have a 1:30 meeting time for planning the action?
Since John Howard's government swept to power as the champion of uranium mining, the anti-uranium forces have had to acknowledge that they're in for the long haul. This is not referred to as a protest, but rather as an annual festival.
Just feel your feet and just come down into a really deep space. And feel your presence. Feel your power. And know that what we speak with the authority of the earth.
But when the protesters hear that a huge piece of machinery is being hauled to the plant, they decide to take a stand.
Can I have your attention, please? I respect your right. You've made your point today, and you've demonstrated your unity against the common cause. I will ask you, however, to move off the roadway. If you do not move off the roadway, this load has to go through and it's obstructing other traffic. We'll have to actually physically remove you off the road.
Place that fact. You're using inappropriate force. It is unreasonable and inappropriate. Righty, what do you suggest we do? Well, you can either get more personnel or you can choose to arrest. What you're doing at the moment is causing injury to the people here on the road.
With that, the police beat a hasty retreat.
What they should do is get everyone's name here, take them off the go. If they were looking for jobs...
Open up abortion clinics, you wouldn't have this problem. Look at the brain dead.
Historically, this industry has lied to the workers and it's lied to the public. I mean, it's never been forthcoming about the environmental releases that have come out of their facilities, and I know there have been problems here with the tailings, and it's never been honest to the workers about the magnitude of exposure they're receiving. And then you get to a second question, they've always understated what the risks of that are.
5, 6, 7, 8, we don't want to radiate!
Workers finishing their shift at the mine watch as the protesters agreed to lead office hours and to pack up the blockade at the day's end.
On a personal basis, there is no danger out there of mining uranium whatsoever.
And do you have any concerns about what happens to the uranium once it leaves Western mining?
I mean, on a large scale, when we get right down to it, yeah, I'd like to see all type of nuclear anything banned completely. But you know, I got to earn a living.
Roxby Downs only exists because of Western mining. 900 miners live here, and more than 1,000 contractors who have come in to start work on expanding the mine use the town's facilities. That night, some of them come to the public meeting on workers' health, which the protesters organised. Western Mining puts in an appearance, sending its public relations boss.
I'd say what I can tell you from the research is that you should be cautious, that it's a dangerous job that you're doing. Anybody who tells you it's not isn't being straightforward. And what we know is that radiation is going to lead to an increase in death rates. What we don't know is what happens with reproductive health. We don't know what happens with non-fatal diseases. There's a lot we don't know, and nobody should be so arrogant as to get up here and say that we understand what radiation is and we can tell you flat out what the risk is.
Dr. David Richardson is the draw card. He's been tracking the effects of radiation on tens of thousands of workers in American nuclear laboratories and plants. His findings are chilling. Workers who receive only half the yearly amount of radiation considered acceptable are dying of cancer, he says. The most vulnerable are older workers, smokers, and the unborn children of pregnant women living nearby.
Every time radiation is penetrating your body, it's going to be breaking up chromosomes. And that's a fact of physics. Radiation at any level disrupts your chromosomes. Your body is an amazing machine of repair, but it's not infallible.
Most of us that work in places like this, and I've worked in lots of them, most of us are actually reasonably intelligent people, and we are there and we are copying this shit. So most of us learn most of this shit, so we know what's happening to us, and it's hard to get the right information to make a judgment. It's a very big judgment whether you work or not, you know? The mining industry in Australia probably feeds 1/4 of our population. So what, you know, if we don't work, nobody gets to die. Nobody gets anything, you know? We know we're getting killed, but that's a choice that we've made, you know? You die sometimes.
I agree with you. I think what you're doing is hard work and it's dirty work, and the least that you're owed is a straight answer about what the dangers are.
Work brought me out here. I'm a physicist by trade, and I came out working as an environmental radiation technician.
Steve Green is the environment manager at the plant.
Part of my job is to calculate members of the public, which in this case is the people that live at Olympic Dam and Roxby Downs, is to calculate their dose, radiation dose, as a result of the operation. And half the problem is even trying to detect it.
Are there any safety issues that concern you as far as your family goes?
Not from the operation, no. The worst safety issue is travelling long distances on roads to the capital city if you need to go to Adelaide. So, no.
But the radioactivity aspect of this operation doesn't worry you?
No.
Thanks.
The basic aim of today is to bring attention to the operation and the existence of this mine. It's probably the largest uranium mine in the world. It operates effectively without independent scrutiny or supervision. It operates effectively as its own radioactive fiefdom. And what it means is that there will be radioactive waste here in the desert in South Australia for 250,000 years. They're currently in the midst of a major expansion, and that expansion is happening remote and away from scrutiny and gaze.
We're here to call Western Mining Corporation to account for the huge costs associated with its destruction of the environment, the effects of its mining operations on the people of Roxby Downs, the peoples of the surrounding areas, the peoples of Australia, and all the peoples of planet Earth. We're here to present a long overdue invoice.
Yes, I'll sign a receipt.
You're not the person to sign it.
The operations manager in Adelaide today. I've explained that to them. I'm the most senior person on site.
That's bullshit. That is bullshit. That PR guy is not the most senior man, Richard.
Not far behind the gates lies the focus of the week-long protest. It's known as the tailings dam, the dumping ground for what's left over after processing the ore. A wall of earth surrounds the 200-hectare paddock.
What are the trucks doing?
Raising the walls. We're currently at 10 metres high. They're raising them to 13 metres high.
That's more than double the height of any sand dunes nearby.
Is any of it radioactive?
Yeah, it's basically 80% of the radioactivity from the ore. It's less radioactive than the ore because we've taken the uranium out. So, yeah.
But it's 80% of it left?
Yep, that's right.
The company regularly sprays water over the area to keep down the radioactive dust. If the South Australian and the federal governments approve its expansion plans, this tip will rise to 30 metres and will cover almost 1,000 hectares. Western Mining says that when it finishes here, it will rehabilitate the area by covering it with a metre of dirt and a layer of rock. The normally conservative Geological Society says that's not good enough.
Our worst fears would be that the radioactive components in the tailings would either escape to the environment or blow away to the environment. In various ways they could escape. And we feel that that, of course, must not happen.
4 years ago, 3 billion litres of radioactive liquids just disappeared from the tailings dam. A state parliamentary inquiry into the so-called leakage found that while it could not yet detect any damage, both the environment and human life were at risk. It also found that Western Mining took too long to detect the problem. As a result, the company now stores liquids in evaporation ponds that are lined with a type of plastic. Dr. Mason says the same should apply to the rest of the dumping ground.
There should be a sealed synthetic membrane placed at the bottom of the tailings containment facility. That should be a minimum. At present, that is not the case.
What we're doing at the moment is working on the most effective rehabilitation method that we can apply to that area. But it's pointless deciding now what the final rehabilitation will be when that's not required for quite a few more years, and in the meantime we may come up with a better process.
Given the seriousness of radioactivity, do you think it's good enough that it hasn't been addressed as well as you would like it, at a minimum standard?
No, we don't think it's good enough. Western Mining should have been able to produce a single, coherent strategy for treatment of the tailings. They haven't. In fact, Western Mining are unsure which way to go. We don't think that's good enough.
But at the same time, you're confident that it'll be absolutely safe for generations in tens of thousands of years to come.
Yes.
What makes you so confident?
Well, what evidence have you got to say it won't be?
Well, the level of danger attached to that substance suggests that there's always a risk.
There's always a risk. There are always risks about many things.
But who's going to pay for monitoring that rehabilitation actually works, given that we don't now, and we possibly in the future won't know what's a perfect form of rehabilitation?
I think here you're trying to apply requirements and standards at WMC that aren't applied anywhere else. I think you're being unreasonable in the sort of questions you're putting now.
Protesters raised the same question in a meeting with Western Mining. Richard Yeeles would not let Inside cover the meeting, fearing our presence could incite civil disobedience. But an amateur cameraman did, and his material is revealing.
Why is WMC handing the responsibility for the long-term management of the tailings over to the government when WMC are getting the profits?
Well, I guess we're talking about hundreds of years into the future. That's what you're talking about, I assume. Well, I mean, can we say that WMC is going to be around and we're always going to have government of some form, but we may not necessarily have WMC? I mean, there has to be some sort of arrangement that the public can have confidence in terms of monitoring what happens here in the future.
The Australian government is confident that uranium sales are worth pursuing and that it's not creating a financial burden for the future generations who have to clean up the mess.
They have solved the problem on getting rid of radioactive waste. I know that's a story being spun. You know, we've had people opposing the nuclear industry, and they started off by saying initially that it's unsafe to mine. Well, with the past experience, and particularly the experience at places like Ranger and Roxby, that's proved to be dead wrong. So they keep moving and moving and moving. They're now running the line that the technology is not there to get rid of radioactive waste. It is there. And all that it needs is the disposal in geologically safe areas, which people know about, in safe conditions.
Can uranium mining ever be safe?
No, I mean, it's not going to be safe. Workers who are doing mining are facing a risk to their life. And then we have more general concern about the public. So it's not only concern about pulling the uranium up out of the ground here, it's that you're packing it off to the United States, and people there are getting exposed. The communities I work with there are the recipients of the uranium dug out of the earth here, and there's no good solution to what you do with the waste. I'd say the best recommendation we could probably do is put it someplace public where it's going to be watched. It's going to sit there and it's going to be a monument to the stupidity of our generation, that we're producing something we don't know how to get rid of, and something that's clearly endangering the health of ourselves and the health of our children and their children's children.
Out in the sleepy lizard country, some of the Kokatha people say they've had enough.
We don't want the poison there. Our country is not a rubbish dump. We're sick of people dumping stuff on our country all the time, coming digging things up, you know. It's bad.
What do you think of Western Mining taking out more uranium from Roxby in that area?
Well, I just think it's just white man's greed.
But for Kokatha people, the issue goes well beyond whether or not uranium should be mined. It has a lot to do with the way Western Mining operates within the Aboriginal community itself.
It's very frustrating what goes on with the European politics with Aboriginal culture today. They say traditional tribal elders, but they do not listen to the traditional people. And it's causing a lot of confusion amongst a lot of our people. And we feel very hurt about it. It turns brothers against brothers, sisters against sisters.
Ningil Reid no longer talks to one side of his family. Both sides have lodged native title claims to the land around Roxby Downs.
When you get the mining companies coming up here, like Western Mining, for instance, they dangle the dollars, then they split the family. And I'm not afraid to say that because I know it's the truth.
Who's this person here, Keaton?
Western Mining has struck up an agreement with the side of Ningil's family which, not surprisingly, does not object to mining.
Remember when he used to live at Andameeka and we used to visit him all the time?
Yeah.
They call themselves the Andameeka Land Council.
What members of the Andameeka Land Council have done over the years with Western Mining is no different to what they have done with other Aboriginal groups. There is no financial benefit in any way or any gain of more than any other group.
What do you blame, if you like, for the setting off of all these hostilities? I mean, is it the coming of Western Mining to this area, or is it the whole native title push? What's at the bottom of it all?
I don't know. I can't answer that question. I think that this is not just in my belief is it's just not in the Roxby Downs area, it's right throughout Australia, and it affects every Aboriginal person.
Is the problem one of Western Mining negotiating with one group of people, or is the problem really a fight within a family, a fight within a tribe?
Well, I couldn't say you can say a tribe, because I think the Andameeka Land Council, in my honest opinion, I think they're the lost tribe. Because they had no contact with the traditional people from day one.
But they were Kokatha, a lot of them were Kokatha originally.
They were Kokatha people when we first took on Western Mining. But they knew the white man techniques on the white man paper and bypassed everybody.
Back at Roxby Downs, David Richardson and the protesters continue to quiz Western Mining about Ningil's concerns.
Sorry?
I didn't think they wanted to mine here at all.
Well, I guess like the white population, if you like, there are different views.
So you're saying that there is no mine shaft on any sacred Aboriginal sites?
Every site that has been brought, that we've been advised, is of significance to Aborigines, has been protected.
You met these guys? You met some of the local custodians?
Yeah.
Brilliant people, they really are. I've had the opportunity to go and walk with them several times, and some of the stories they tell is really just some classic guys. They're really spot on.
Classic guys they might be, but they're not happy. And it's not just the Kokatha. For years, this has been known as Arabunna territory. It's almost 200 kilometres away from the mine, near a town called Reid.
It's created a big division in a family. The bitterness and that, it will be years before the bitterness between the family groups will be resolved, if it's resolved. And we have the elders who are passing on, and they've got to take the bitterness and that with them.
2 years ago, a fight broke out here between two sides of the same Aboriginal family. One man was shot dead. The fight is over an old pastoral lease that belonged to a European who married an Arabunna woman.
Gee, it's sad to come back and see this old place like this, these old buildings.
Half of their descendants want the South Australian government to press on with its plans to turn the property into a state park. The other half don't.
And one day, when we get through to the government, we'll do that. We'll bring all them kids, all the families back.
If it were a state park, it could be protected from this pipeline, which Western Mining is running across the property to bring water from the Great Artesian Basin to the mine at Roxby Downs. Massive quantities of water are essential for processing the ore.
The mine's supposed to go for another
got another lifespan of 200 years apparently, and this upgrade of this water line will be enough to keep them going.
For 14 years, Western Mining has extracted water from the Great Artesian Basin, and some nearby mound springs have dried up. The long-term impact on ecosystems around these springs and the long-term effect on the basin is not known. Western Mining is currently drawing up 15 megalitres a day, free of charge. It wants the go-ahead to draw up 3 times that amount in the future.
The water is part of the Aboriginal cultural asset. It's a very, very important, is as much as part or more as the kangaroo. I mean, you can't live without the water.
Western Mining denies it's taking sides in the Arabunna conflict, but confirms it has negotiated an agreement with the breakaway group. That group refused to talk on camera, but said it was happy with the mining company's activities and got help from Western Mining in preparing its native title claim. Reg Dodd now refuses to have anything to do with native title.
In a lot of places, it's being used to benefit developers in the area. It just created prejudice, racism and ill feeling right across Australia. It's not for me to go out and prove my right to that land. I know my right to that land. It's for the people who say that I don't belong to the land to prove that that land don't belong to me.
What do you think of the countryside here?
No, I love it, and that's why I stayed on for 7 years, and there's some fantastic areas around it, and most people find it really gets to them eventually, and they like to get out and have a look at some of the national parks around the place, and just go out for a walk in the bush. It's just fantastic. So there's and people grow a real respect for the environment, just being here.
As developers and protesters vie for the moral high ground on environmental matters, Aboriginal communities are pitted against each other. Caught in the crossfire, Reg Dodd offers some advice.
I tend to think that rallies and protesters are targeting the wrong group, because it's again, I must go back, the policy makers, the legislation is there in place for the mining companies to go out and do these things. So they have a right to do this. Perhaps we should be targeting the policy makers rather than the people who are out doing the work on the ground.
In their own way, that's just what the conservationists are doing.
Our fight, and it is a fight, is not with you, it's not with workers, it's not with families. Far be it, God forbid, it's not any of that. Our fight is with the companies and the governments that use single-minded short-term logic to create the world's longest-lived, most toxic waste product. No government and no company has a mandate to waste, and neither splitting the atom or splitting our community is desirable. Thanks for your time.
Northeast, the forest M. It contains